5 days. That's all the time Melissa Parker had left before her daughter's heart would fail completely, and the hospital had just told her they wouldn't operate unless she found $80,000 she did not have. Picture that for a second. Picture sitting in a cold office, listening to a stranger explain that your little girl's life is a price tag, and you are short. That was Melissa's Tuesday morning. And what happened next inside that hospital would change not just her daughter's life, but her own forever. Melissa had barely slept in weeks. She could feel it in her bones as she walked through the sliding glass doors of County General, her worn purse strap digging into her shoulder, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone in the lobby could hear it. The fluorescent lights overhead felt harsher than usual that morning, the kind of light that shows every shadow under your eyes, every sign of the sleepless night spent Googling congenital heart defects at 2 a.m, praying for answers that never came. She was a teaching assistant. She made enough to keep the lights on and Harper fed, but not enough, never enough, for what was coming. "I'm here to see Dr. Reynolds about my daughter's surgery," she told a receptionist, a kind-eyed woman named Patty, and she hoped her voice didn't crack the way her hands were shaking. Patty's gentle nod, her murmured of course, "Take a seat," carried a softness that almost undid Melissa right there in the lobby. Because kindness, when you're barely holding on, can crack you open faster than cruelty ever could. She sat in the waiting room, clutching a folder of paperwork that felt heavier than it should have. $175,000. That was the number typed across the estimate, and no matter how many times you read it, it didn't get any smaller. Insurance would cover a fraction. The online fundraiser had scraped together what it could. Every friend, every cousin, every co-worker who could spare $20 had already given. And still, the gap yawned open in front of her like a canyon. She had no bridge to cross. When Dr. Reynolds finally called her back, his face was kind but tired, the face of a man who had delivered this particular kind of news too many times. "Harper's condition is progressing faster than we thought," he said gently. "We need to schedule the surgery for next week." Next week, not next month, not when you've saved enough. Next week, or her daughter's heart might not get another chance. Melissa sat frozen, doing the math in her head over and over, and the number never changed. She was still $80,000 short of a miracle. She signed anyway. What else could she do? Every form, every consent, every line asking her to promise money she didn't have. Her hand moved almost on its own, because refusing wasn't an option when it was Harper's face she pictured, Harper's wild curls, Harper's gap-toothed smile, Harper naming consolations out the car window like the sky belonged to her personally. This was a little girl who loved dinosaurs and could tell you the difference between a Triceratops and a Stegosaurus before she could tie her own shoes, and Melissa would have signed anything, anything at all, to buy her one more year, one more birthday, one more bedtime story. But paperwork alone doesn't pay a hospital bill, and Melissa knew the real conversation, the one that mattered, was still waiting for her 3 floors up. That conversation happened in a cramped billing office under buzzing fluorescent tubes, across a desk from a thin man named Mr. Davis, who didn't even look up when she walked in. "You're still significantly short on the required payment," he said, flat, rehearsed, like he'd said the exact same sentence to 100 desperate parents before her. She tried to explain. The second job she'd just taken, the fundraiser still climbing, the down payment she could scrape together by Friday. But he cut her off with a raised hand and a policy number. 60% secured before scheduling, he told her, unless the case qualified as an immediate life-threatening emergency, and according to hospital guidelines, Hayes apparently did not. The room actually seemed to tilt. Dr. Reynolds had just told her Harper needed this surgery in a matter of days, and now this man in a wrinkled shirt was telling her it might not happen at all unless she found money that simply did not exist. "Please," she heard herself say, her voice breaking apart at the edges, "there must be something." And that was the exact moment the door opened, and everything changed. A woman walked in wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to command the entire room. Without her saying a single word, Mr. Davis practically leapt out of his chair. "Ms. Collins, I wasn't aware you were visiting this department today." Victoria Collins, the CEO of County General Hospital. She turned those sharp, assessing blue eyes on Melissa, and for a moment Melissa felt like she was being read like an open book. "Would you excuse us?" Victoria asked, and then she and Mr. Davis stepped just outside the glass partition, and Melissa watched, heart in her throat, as an intense, hushed exchange unfolded just a few feet away. Mr. Davis's confident posture crumbled by the second. When the door opened again, Victoria walked in alone, sat down beside Melissa, and said the words that would replay in Melissa's mind for the rest of her life. "You and Harper are not alone in this." If you ever had a stranger show up at the exact moment you thought all hope was gone, you already know the way the air in a room seems to shift when it happens. Victoria explained, gently but firmly, that Harper's surgery would proceed exactly as scheduled. No more delays, no more impossible deadlines, under something called the Children's Cardiac Care Initiative. Melissa didn't understand it yet. Not fully, but she understood the relief flooding through her chest, loosening a knot that had been tightening for weeks. Victoria invited her upstairs for coffee, and Melissa followed her through hallway after hallway of hospital staff who nodded with visible surprise at seeing their CEO personally walking a stranger through the building, as though something unusual, something almost unheard of, was happening right in front of them. And it was. Because Victoria Collins did not do this. Not normally. Not ever. So why Harper? Victoria's office felt nothing like the sterile floors below. Warm light, soft furniture, fresh flowers on a side table, more like someone's living room than an executive suite. She explained the initiative was new, still being built, and that Harper would be among the very first children it helped. She asked, carefully, if Melissa would be willing to let the hospital share pieces of Harper's story to help secure future funding, promising full approval over anything before it went public. It seemed a small, almost laughably small prize for her daughter's life. Melissa agreed without hesitation. But even as she nodded, even as gratitude flooded through her, a quiet question kept nagging the back of her mind. Why had her case, out of all the desperate families that must walk through those doors, landed specifically on this powerful woman's desk? Victoria's answer was smooth, practiced, professional, and somehow it didn't fully satisfy the question at all. The week before surgery blurred by an appointments and paperwork, but true to her word, Victoria's promise held. No more bills arrived demanding payment Melissa didn't have. No more cold conversations about percentages and policy. Just quiet, unexplainable kindness at every tone, and a growing sense that Victoria Collins was watching over this case far more closely than any hospital CEO should reasonably need to. The night before surgery, Victoria called personally, her voice softer than Melissa had ever heard it, asking how Harper was holding up, laughing warmly when Melissa relayed that Harper described her heart as getting excited to become a super heart. When Melissa finally worked up the nerve to ask why their case, specifically, had caught her attention, the silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to feel like its own answer. "Let's just say I have a personal interest in pediatric cardiac care," Victoria said at last, her tone careful, guarded, like a door held only halfway open. Melissa hung up that night more certain than ever that there was a story here nobody had told her yet. Morning came in soft pink light, and Melissa dressed her daughter in her favorite dinosaur socks, because if a 5-year-old was going to face open-heart surgery, she was doing it in style, T-Rex and all. Harper chatted the whole ride to the hospital about her stuffed dinosaur Rexy coming along for support, about the doctors giving her a super heart, about being braver than any dinosaur that ever lived. Melissa held her composure by sheer will alone. At the hospital, Victoria was already waiting in the lobby, dressed down but every bit as commanding, and she knelt to Harper's level with a warmth that made Melissa's chest ache in a whole new way, because this wasn't performance. This was something real, something Victoria seemed to need almost as much as Harper needed comfort. Then came Dr. Gabriela Martinez, the surgeon Victoria had personally recruited, kneeling beside Harper with the same gentleness, promising her she'd be fast asleep through the whole thing and that her heart just needed a little help to wake better. Harper considered this with a seriousness only a 5-year-old can manage, decided it was acceptable, and declared that Rexy would be brave too. When the transport team finally wheeled that gurney away, Melissa's carefully held composure nearly shattered on the spot. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky," she whispered. "Love you more than all the dinosaurs that ever lived." Harper answered, their private ritual, their private promise, and then her daughter disappeared around the corner into the hands of strangers, leaving Melissa standing frozen with her arms still half raised in a wave that had nowhere left to land. Victoria led her into a private waiting room far more comfortable than anything Melissa expected. Soft couches, warm light, real solitude. And then, once Melissa finally broke down and let herself cry for the first time in weeks, Victoria returned an hour later with coffee, pastries, and something Melissa hadn't asked for at all, the truth. She noticed something oddly familiar in Victoria's face, in the tilt of her head, in the shape of her eyes, and finally, gathering every ounce of courage she had left, Melissa asked a question that had been building inside her for days. Why are you really doing all this for us? The truth, please. Victoria's composed expression cracked wide open. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, worn photograph, and placed it silently into Melissa's hands. A little girl, 7 or 8, wild curly hair, missing front tooth, smiling bravely from a hospital bed surrounded by monitors. A girl who looked so much like Harper that Melissa's breath caught in her throat. Her name was Charlotte, Victoria said quietly. My daughter. 20 years ago, Victoria explained, she had faced this exact nightmare, a heart defect, a surgery she couldn't afford, months spent scraping together money through fundraisers and second mortgages that came too late. By the time she'd raised enough, Charlotte's condition had deteriorated past saving. The surgery failed. Charlotte died, and Victoria, in the wreckage of that loss, made herself a promise. She would spend the rest of her life making sure no other mother sat where she once sat, watching a clock and a bank account both run out at the same terrible time. She went back to school, earned her way into hospital administration, and spent 2 decades quietly building toward this exact initiative, one she'd finally gotten board approval for right around the time Harper's case landed on Dr. Martinez's desk. When Harper's face, with her wild curls and that same fierce, hopeful smile, crossed Victoria's line of sight, it wasn't professional interest that moved her to act. It was a mother who had lost everything, recognizing a chance to save something. They sat together through the long hours of surgery, sharing stories, watching the clock, 2 women bound now by something far deeper than a hospital transaction. Every update from the operating room tightened the knot in Melissa's chest a little further, until finally, just past the 5-hour mark, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, exhausted but smiling. The surgery had worked. Harper's heart was already responding beautifully. Strong vitals, no complications, a recovery ahead, but a real one, a future one. Melissa's knees nearly buckled with relief, caught only by Victoria's steady hand at her elbow, and in that instant, whatever distance remained between hospital CEO and desperate mothers simply dissolved. In the days that followed, Victoria kept her word completely. The hospital board approved full funding for the Children's Cardiac Care Initiative, and Harper's entire procedure, along with all her follow-up care, was covered completely, permanently, without a single additional bill. There was more too, a social worker to help navigate the maze of paperwork, counseling if the family ever needed it, even a stipend to replace Melissa's lost wages during recovery. Victoria visited nearly every single day Harper spent recovering, bringing dinosaur books and star stickers and a soft blanket covered in constellations, watching this little girl heal with an expression Melissa recognized now as something between grief and grace. On the day Harper finally came home, Victoria arrived with a going-away gift, a custom-stuffed heart stitch to match Harper's own surgical scar, and a children's book called Charlotte Superheart, the story of a brave little girl whose heart needed fixing. When Harper innocently asked if Charlotte was like her, Victoria answered without hesitation, her voice steady despite everything it must have cost her. Yes, sweetheart. She was very much like you, brave and strong and special. As Melissa carried her healed, healthy daughter out through the hospital doors and into the sunlight, dinosaur socks and all, Victoria knelt one last time to Harper's level and told her she had the strongest, bravest heart she'd ever known. That now, both girls had super hearts, one healing in this world, and one watching over it from somewhere beyond. Harper turned back at the door and called out, "Bye, Miss Victoria, my heart and I will come visit you." And Victoria, composure finally, fully set aside, simply answered, "I'll be waiting, brave girl." As they drove away from County General for the last time, Melissa glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, safe, healed, and utterly unaware of just how close they'd come to losing everything. And somewhere behind them, inside that hospital, Victoria Collins was already turning to the next file on her desk, the next child who needed a super heart, making sure that Charlotte's memory would keep saving lives, one family at a time.